Vermont's Catholic Bishop Christopher Coyne was in his car a couple of Sundays ago when the call came in. Pope Francis had decided it was time he move up to lead the Archdiocese of Hartford. It was big news in Connecticut when the news broke this week. Coyne made the trip down to say hello. That archdiocese, roughly 10 times the size of the Vermont Church. Back in South Burlington, Coyne told us he doesn't really want to leave, but really couldn't say no. Thanks for the time.
You're welcome.
What do I call you right now, by the way? Are you still bishop or something else?
Technically, I became an archbishop as of 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Monday. It's by the announcement that one takes on the title.
That the Pope in Rome was focused on you and on Burlington, Vermont is something when you think about it.
It is, and it's very humbling. The appointment to be Bishop of Burlington was through him as well, but then to also be tagged to go to a much larger diocese is also humbling.
How does the process work? I mean, you don't raise your hand.
No, you don't, and neither would I have raised my hand. I love being in Burlington. I didn't want to move. But I accept it, and I'll do my best in Hartford. Usually, what they're doing now is, as a bishop, especially one of a large metropolitan like Boston or Hartford or New York or whatever, is getting close to retirement age. They now send out letters to the neighboring bishops and others in the area, and they're saying, Bishop is looking to retire. Bishop Blair is looking to retire. Archbishop Blair. Do you have any recommendations, any thoughts to make on what's going on in that archdiocese? Any recommendations of bishops that you think would be good to replace the archbishop? So that then goes to the papal ambassador, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, and then he would submit it to the Congregation for Bishops and as well. And then the congregation makes recommendations to the Holy Father, and he usually just stamps what they offer, but he does at times make other decisions.
But you don't say no when they tap you on the...
I don't say no because I'm called to be obedient and to serve the church. I'd have to have a good reason to say no.
Yeah.
If they'd asked me to go to Fairbanks to be the Archbishop of, there is an archdiocese there, I would have said, it's not a good idea because I am deathly afraid of single-engine planes. And so that would be...
Which is how you get around.
Which is how you get around. And I think that would be an obvious reason to say no, but there's no reason to say no. There was no reason for me to say no at Hartford other than just my desire to stay here in Burlington.
Much larger diocese in Connecticut than you're accustomed to here, but has this been in some respect good training?
I think so. I mean, I've learned a lot of things. One of my things that I'm most proud of is the way that the staff here in the building has developed over the time that I was here, through retirement, moving on, or just taking different jobs. The senior staff in the building, which basically is not just for this building, the chancery, but also for the administration of the whole diocese, has pretty much flipped and brought on a lot of good men, but a lot of good women, and placing women in positions of leadership and administration, and allowing them to do their jobs, and backing them up, and being with them, and listening to them, and hearing their opinions, and accepting what they have to say, and oftentimes changing my mind because what's down around the table. I hope I'm sure that that's also the case, I hope, in the Archdiocese of Hartford, but I would want to, as much as possible, bring good qualified people, both men and women, into positions as things play out, but I'm not going in and getting rid of people, obviously.
Well, is it a more Catholic diocese than Vermont? As you know, we looked at Pew data, and Northern New England tends to be a largely unaffiliated, not largely, but it has a higher percentage of religiously unaffiliated people than most of the country.
I think the Catholics that are in the churches in Vermont are just as Catholics as the ones that are in the churches in Hartford, Archdiocese of Hartford. I will say part of it's the culture, I think. I think the culture of Connecticut is still one in which people belong to churches. And if you see your neighbors and you see your friends, and that's where they are part of, and in the parishes in which you live, that kind of sustains you, that supports you, that's part of the whole deal of being part of a body of Christ and being with other people. But if you come into a church and you're seeing that your neighbors aren't going there anymore and the churches are empty, which is what we're experiencing in Vermont, there's that sociological issue that people say, well, why am I here? And maybe this isn't as important as it was. And but there's also just I think Connecticut's going to face this. Maybe in the next 10 or 15 years, they'll be facing the same dynamics as we are, and they are already, but not as accelerated as in Vermont.
Can we talk about some of the challenges that you've been forced to confront from a global pandemic that shut your parishes, shut much of society, to your decision to be pretty public with the list of priests over time who've been abusive. You had to deal with the St. Joseph Orphanage issue. I mean, are you satisfied with what you've been able to do, particularly in those latter two issues?
I'm very satisfied with with the report from the independent commission made up of 7 laymen and laywomen volunteers. The amount of work that they put in was unbelievable, and I wonder if they'd known what they were getting into, whether they would have agreed to do it just because of the time and effort. But I can't thank them enough for the report of the names that we have from our files of priests that sadly had serious allegations made against them, and those names were published. There were a couple of priests whose names were new, and families and friends who knew these priests were very upset and outraged at me and the report, but it is what it was, and I told them that I would publish what they had. So that was, I think that was a good thing. And subsequently, we've only had a couple more names that we've had to add as new allegations come forward in the latest go-round of some of the legal cases that we've settled. So I'm glad that there hasn't been an extensive addition, that when the report was published, it was pretty much settled with a few new names because of new allegations from 40, 50 years ago. The St. Joseph's Orphanage, that's still an ongoing issue here. My detractors are some of the former orphans there, the orphanage group. It was very difficult time for us here in the building. We cooperated with the State Attorney General and voluntarily. And my staff here, especially down in Catholic Charities, spent hours and hours and hours turning over files and things to this commission. But before the work was even done and before they even published a report, they already said, they told us, they didn't ask us, they told us, you're going to be part of a restorative justice panel. We're bringing in this they hired the restorative justice expert. And then they told us that we were going to be part of this. And we said, well, I think restorative justice involves a conversation in both directions. And then that's the main reason why I chose not to be involved in restorative justice, because it was neither restorative nor just, and from our side. And that has been an ongoing source of upset for that group of former orphans. And I regret that it played out that way. I think it could have been handled differently, and we would have been very much a part of it, because I did say, we'll do it, but not under the conditions that you're presently putting it forward.
On the priest abuse issue, is this now in the rear view? Or is there another shoe to drop?
I don't think there's another shoe to drop. And I don't want to say it's in the rear view, because it is in the sense of, like, the list and all those other things, but it's not in the rear view because there are still victims out there and families who had an uncle or a daughter or an aunt to somebody who was a victim. And so the repercussions from that still will go on for years to come. I hope it's in the rear view in terms of never allowing it to happen again. And policies like we have now, whenever there's an allegation made against a priest, even if it's in the past, we turn it right over to the law enforcement. And we let them make the initial decisions.
No hesitation.
No hesitation. No, goes right to DCF. And it also goes right to state police or wherever. We stay out of it. We do not involve ourselves in our own investigation. We let them make a determination, and then we go from there.
And that's a change.
It is a change, because a lot of times the investigations were handled in-house, right? And then determinations were made 20, 25 years ago by the bishop and by his council and by his lawyers without really bringing law enforcement in, because you were talking about crimes and they should have been reported, but they weren't.
You have also presided during a time in which the state has, in response to the Supreme Court, passed constitutional amendments enshrining abortion rights in our state, gender-affirming care, same-sex marriage. In your business, does that make this a tough environment to be the Catholic bishop?
It makes it more challenging.
Yeah.
I think part of the issue with being the head of the Catholic Church and also just the Catholic community in Vermont is that there's a lot of anger at the church, especially in terms of the stand-up work that we did to try and get in front of and oppose the constitutional amendment. Mm-hmm. And we're seen as like the main agency that had to be confronted by the pro-life, pro-choice people. And that still carries on. And it comes out in different ways in which we're struggling to kind of just remain standing in the state. For example, we won through the state Supreme Court the right to receive funds in sending for towns that don't have their own high schools. So the Catholic high schools, school tuition. Yeah. And that's going on. But the end around now is that they're now removing us as accredited schools, or trying to remove us as accredited schools, so that we can't receive any more funding by requiring that we sign on to all of the non-discrimination and on tolerance practices of the state. And unfortunately, we can't do that for all kinds of reasons, but it is hard.
Which is most objectionable?
I think the most objectionable thing would be the transgender buy-in for students, for minors, children under the age of 18. You know, that somehow we have to listen. As I said to principals and teachers, we've got to love that kid, and when they come before us, we have to understand and address the fact that they're dealing with these issues, and we want to help them. We want to work with them, and we'll walk with the parents and the student as far as we can. But they'll get to a certain point where we can't do what they're asking us to do because of our belief in the reality of created man and women. We've had some situations where people have withdrawn their children from our schools, but they didn't leave angry. They thanked us for the support that we gave the child, and they just realized that we can't help them further in terms of wanting to address their change in gender, something like that. But then, as a matter of fact, we've had one family that left and now they want to come back because they found the environment in our Catholic school much more pastoral, much more loving. So it's hard and it's difficult, but we try and do the best we can. Everyone does.
You'll be in Vermont for a while longer, but what are you telling your faithful here in our state as you begin to take out your suitcase?
I think I just continue to thank them for the good work that we've done, for the support that they've given me and continue to give me. I would thank them for their welcome and for their goodbyes now. But I think the Catholic community in Vermont is not going away. We're going to be here. How we're going to be present, perhaps smaller, perhaps where we are, who knows. But you have good priests, you have good lay workers, you have good people in the pews. We still continue pretty much to be the largest private provider of social services in the state of Vermont when you add up all of the food pantries, all of the thrift stores, all of the outreach that we do from all of our agencies, Catholic Charities, but all of our parishes. Every single one of our parishes has some kind of an outreach. And the volume of what we do as a Catholic church community is something to be proud of, and that's something we can should continue to foster, especially those who need it so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Stuart.
And thank you very much for the time.
You're welcome.
Something else we did not know, the promotion comes with no raise in pay. Coyne begins work in Connecticut this fall. It's unclear how long Vermont Catholics might wait for a new Bishop of Burlington. Next, a lot of Americans